press record, that would be great. And then it'll be made available to you if you would like the link to it. Plus, we also have the link to all the other sessions we have. So if you don't currently have those and are wanting those, just let us know and we'll make sure you get a copy of it. I'd like to welcome our guests from all various organizations across Ontario, plus our employees and some board of directors to our session with Al on how organizations behave. I have the pleasure of introducing Al. Dr. Al Condalucci has been a leader in community building, human services, and inclusive advocacy work for the past 50 years. Holding a PhD and MSW from the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Condalucci has been the CEO of CLASS, Community Living and Support Services, a major nonprofit community building organization in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, from 1973 to 2019. He holds faculty status at the University of Pittsburgh in the schools of social work and health, rehab sciences, and is author of 7 books, including the acclaimed Interdependence, The Route to Community, 1995, and more recently, Social Capital, The Key to Macro Change, 2014. In 2018, he received the Key to the City of Pittsburgh, the highest civilian honor that can be given to a community member. He serves as a consultant, advisor, and human service coach, and is on a number of nonprofit boards and government commissions on state, local, and national levels. He helped found and convenes the Interdependence Network, an international coalition of professionals, family members, and consumers interested in community engagement and macro change, and his contact information is at the end of this presentation. So please welcome Al.
Great, thank you, Tanya, and thanks everyone, and happy holidays. Just coming off of our kind of big spiritual holidays that fall in the spring. Easter and Passover and Ramadan and some of the other ways we kind of spiritually reflect on life. And it's interesting, often these holidays, these spring holidays are separated by weeks or days, and it's interesting that these 3 holidays converging at a time when we really need some spiritual guidance and support. Maybe it's a kind of a spiritual message for us as it relates to a lot of the unrest that's happening around our world. And so welcome to our training series, and this is the general training series that Community Living Algoma coordinates. We've been doing one of these per month over the last couple months. This is actually our 3rd cycle. So welcome, glad you're here. Hope that you had good rest and ate a lot over the weekend and are ready to kind of hit the ground running. This session, this series of sessions is really designed to be general, right, in a broad way, sort of thinking about concepts and topics that can relate to greater success in the work we do. And I know for this training series, we have guests from really all over Ontario and other provinces as well that have plugged in. And we've covered a lot of kind of topics that can commingle, if you will, with the overarching, I think, challenge that most of us share, and that is to create a more inclusive, more welcoming community, and to provide supports to people who have been left behind in community or maybe never really welcomed in the first place, and to kind of create those bridges and those opportunities for full community participation. And our session today really looks at our organizations, our organizational behavior, maybe some things that we ought to consider transforming within our organization. How do we move from being just good at what we do to being great at what we do? How do we strive for greater organizational excellence? And so the things that we're going to look at really focus in on organizational theory and organizational behavior today. And they can be applied to any organization. You can think about these in any kind of collection that you're involved in. Obviously, most of us are here today as players in an official organization, either a governmentally supported organization or a privately supported organization, a nonprofit, for-profit, with an agenda to really serve our customers, again, using kind of a broad, more organizational perspective. And most of us, again, coming from kind of a formal organization experience. However, organizational behavior and organizational, analysis really affects any organization that we might have some, involvement with, from clubs and groups and associations we belong to, churches or synagogues that we're members of, mosques that we might be members of, PTAs and, sports leagues and clubs, have these organizational characteristics, right? So although a lot of what we're going to be looking at in this session examine, more formal organizations, the applicability really applies to any organization that you have or might have some relationship with. And a lot of the material that we're going to go over is really bore out of, some university responsibilities that I have at the University of Pittsburgh. Tanya indicated that I'm associated with University of Pittsburgh in the School of Health and Rehab Sciences and the School of Social Work. And my appointment in the School of Health and Rehab Sciences has me teaching actually an organizational theory class, right? And I've been teaching this course now for some 15, almost 20 years. And I've really tried to continually upgrade and make current and make relevant the material we use in the class. And today I've sort of pulled out some key pieces from that material to have us think about and really examine the application of these things within the organizational context that you're thinking about today. It might be the agency that you actually happen to work for right now, or it might be thinking about how can I apply some of this to a club or a group. I know that in my tenure, I've been involved with lots of organizations, and obviously working for a large nonprofit organization as the CEO, but also being on boards of directors, being I was president of the PTA when my children were in school, and all of those experiences are relevant. They're really relevant to understanding how organizations work and things about those organizations. So Anthony J said the creative mind can spot the wrong answers, but it takes a really creative mind to spot the wrong questions, right? So what questions are you raising as it relates to the impact of your organization on the population that you're gathered or that you're challenged to work for or to support, right? And as you look in some of the literature, there are some really interesting theories and constructs. These items that you see in terms of what makes an organization really great come from the Malcolm Baldrige award, right? And every year, Malcolm Baldrige company offers an award to top organizations, really around the world. And the Baldrige categories are really interesting to look at and think about, because the award judges examine these 7 variables within an organization, right? Obviously, leadership, when we think about organizations, and organizational behavior, we automatically think, well, who's the leader of the organization? Who's in charge? And, how viable is that leader? And so leadership is obviously a critical variable, but it's only one of 7 critical variables that are used to gauge a really good, great, excellent organization, right? The second category in the Baldrige Award overview is, how does the organization use information and analyze activities, right? So the management of information is always really important in an organization, and that's obviously transcends leadership, right? Because information flows through organizations. There's some formal aspects to information flow, right? Where you write you write an email to all of your staff saying, we're going to be doing A, B, and C, right? And you're passing that information along. That's in a formal way. You have staff meetings, you have annual meetings, you have other gatherings, board meetings, where information is exchanged and analyzed by those folks in that meeting, right? But also information really flows informally in organizations. The grapevine, for example, is a term used to describe the informal information flow. So you're at the water cooler and did you hear that the CEO is actually thinking about stepping down, or all of the kinds of things that get passed in an informal way is considered like the grapevine. But it's also part of information exchange. You can't control grapevine. It's going to happen whether you want it or not. In an organization, people exchange information. Strategic planning. I'm sure you're kind of up to your eyeballs in strategic planning. Every year, organizations undergo a strategic planning process. Maybe not every year. Sometimes they go every 3 years, sometimes every 5 years. But strategic planning is really an effort to think down the path, right? What do we want to do? What do we want to achieve? What are some of the goals and objectives we should have? Human resource development. I don't have to tell most of you on this call how important this is, especially with staffing shortages and people thinking about where they want to go in their career path, and how the organization manages and develops their human resources. Process management. Process management is the stuff which the organization actually does its business, right? Business results, right? Outcomes. How did we do? Did we hit benchmarks? Did we hit goals? And then customer focus and satisfaction, right? And are your customers happy with what you do? Are they satisfied? Do they really feel the organization is delivering on what it purports to do, what it says it's going to do? Now, these 7 things, arguably, you might say, well, what is the most important one, right? And so, just right now in as we're thinking about these Baldrige categories, and as you're thinking about your own organization, I'd like you to, in the chat room, identify which one you think really is the most important. Now, obviously, they're all important, and they got to work in sync, and they've really got to be able to apply. But I'd like to just sort of have you just type in which one, and just, you type it as it, you don't have to put the whole thing in: leadership, strategic planning, business results, customers focus, what one do you think is most important? And I'm going to jump in: customer satisfaction, um, agree with customer focus, on the customer focus, customer satisfaction, leadership. Um, so people are just sort of weighing in here. Good. Again, there's hardly a wrong answer on this, but human resources, somebody just typed in leadership, another leadership again. And folks are just human resources as we go into just strategic planning. Yeah. Again, all of these being really important dimensions, no question about it. But it's an interesting exercise to really think what really rises to the top. Is there one that is more prominent than the others? Customer focus and this is just an academic kind of an exercise, but every time I do information related to the Baldrige Award, and I'll get groups of people together, my students or whomever, and I ask that kind of question. It's you get the range, certainly as we saw in our chat room exercise with this. But one of the things that that I did is one semester I had a Baldrige Award winner, the CEO of a company in Pittsburgh that won the Baldrige Award, the national United States Baldrige Award. I had him come and speak to my class, and we had just done an exercise with our students on like this, where we asked people to think about what's the most important. And so we posed it to our guest, and we said, okay, your company won the Baldrige Award, a couple years ago. And what do you think as the CEO of a Baldrige Award winning company, what do you think is the most important of these 7 critical variables? And his answer was customer focus and satisfaction. He really felt that was key to winning the Baldrige Award for his company. Okay? So let me see here if I can get this back in. So Peters and Waterman, 2 management gurus who have been studying excellence, had looked at what makes an excellent company. And they wrote a landmark book. It was really one of the biggest selling business books a number of years ago. It was called In Search of Excellence, and subsequently put out new editions or additional information related to looking for excellence within an organization. And here's what they propose as critical variables to an excellent organization. Okay? That organizations need to be flexible. They need to adjust to a changing world, to a changing marketplace, if you will, in terms of their business. Has to be customer focused, right? This is what our Baldrige Award winner shared. Stick to your knitting. And what Peters and Waterman mean by that is the organizations will oftentimes expand into other kinds of things, right? They'll look for, well, we've been successful doing A, B, and C, so let's try to do D. Let's add D to our menu that we offer. And Peters and Waterman says that when an organization begins to get a little bit too far out there, it begins to lose its excellence edge. So sticking to your knitting, what are we good at? What do we want to continue with? entrepreneurial, meaning are there ways that you can, innovative ways to broaden your impact, your business results, and an organization that's fast, right? And Peters and Waterman really argue that in our day and age, organizations have to react quickly to changing environments, to a changing regulation, and organizations that can be quick on their feet, nimble, if you will, are oftentimes, more successful than other organizations. So when we think about organizations and organizational behavior, we sort of say, well, organizations, well, how do you define it? So here's a definition right out of the textbook, right? The organizational theory textbook. Organizations are collections of people, right? So they're comprised of a number of people with a mission and a vision, right? Organized in a deliberate manner. In other words, there's a deliberate, intentional structure to guide the organization, with clear behaviors and relationships, right, to achieve goal or objective related to the mission, right? So this is kind of a simplified, almost a naked, definition of an organization. But there, and all these pieces are important, but two pieces really jump out in this definition, right? One is that there's a structure, a deliberate way the organization is structured or organized to do its work, but it also has a culture. It develops a sort of a feeling, an energy that you get or sense with the organization. Now, this blend of structure and culture really become an important point that we're gonna move towards as with some further information on this. It's almost like body and soul, right? A body and soul. So you know that you have a body, right? And your body is structured in certain ways, right? You have bones in certain places, muscles in certain places. Your body is structured. It's physically structured. And you can work on making that structure of your body stronger, right? You can exercise and work out and really try to do things that are going to cause your body to be more successful as you navigate through life. But you also have a soul, right? You can't see it. You can't measure it. In fact, nobody has ever seen a soul before, but we know we have it, right? We know that there's some sort of energy that goes through you that is intangible. It's not, you can't measure. You can measure bones, you can measure the density of structure, but it's hard to measure the soul, the culture of an organization, right? How it feels, right? I know with my students, whenever we're studying organizational theory, and we get into this sort of discussion about structure and spirit, right? And I'll send them out to go visit an organization, and I'll set up some meetings with, CEOs or program directors that I know in Pittsburgh. And my students will go in small groups and they'll go visit the organization. And their challenge is to say, when you get into the organization, I want you to kind of find out about how it's structured, right? Is it really like top heavy? Is it flatter? And there's a lot of different things we will say about structure in just a minute. But then I ask them, how does it feel? When you walk into that organization, what did you feel? What did you sense? Did it feel welcoming? Did you feel, the spirit of energy, a spirit of engagement, a spirit of relationship. Did you feel that, right? And as we look at organizations, we'll talk a little bit more about various types of structures, because structures can inform the spirit of the organization. There are some formal structures that can be deliberately flexed in order to bring out a certain spirit. In Pittsburgh, a couple of years ago, Google opened an office in Pittsburgh, and one of our departments at the University of Pittsburgh's School of Health and Rehab Sciences had a division in the same building that Google moved into. And so, and I would go to that division to do lectures and to meet with colleagues. And so when Google moved in, I did a tour of the Google office. And I got to tell you, much like you might have seen or, heard, it was really laid back, right? I mean, there was the way that it was designed physically was really intentionally developed to promote a spirit, an entrepreneurial spirit, a spirit of inclusion, a spirit of teamwork, a spirit of sharing, of comparing. There were little pods in different places where people could kind of hang out. People had their dogs there. It was bicycles, skateboards, were there. There was play space. The food was always present. Those are kind of deliberate things that Google does in order to enhance the spiritual side of the equation. Okay, so this juxtaposition between structure and spirit, we're going to get into that as we move through some of understanding organizational behavior. Right. So a mission and vision. Every organization has a mission and a vision that you worked long and hard on. You probably were involved in focus groups and discussions around the mission and the vision, right? But the mission and the vision statements are really, they're just sort of a piece of the core assumptions that an organization holds. What are the values and beliefs that the organization has? Right? These are core assumptions that the organization has. The core assumptions then lead to a statement, a mission and vision statement, and then they're backed up by organizational artifacts. Okay, I'll talk about artifacts in just a minute. But this trilogy, right? This start with assumptions and then moving to a statement that captures what are the core assumptions of our organization, and then do the behaviors of the organization as they manifest. Do they match the statement and the assumption? Let's get back to this idea of the core assumption. What are the core assumptions of your organization? Right? This is digging down deeply into not just what you do, not just how you do it, but why you do it. Like, what are the core reasons? All people are valuable. All people should participate. All people have worth and value. What are those core assumptions that the organization actually was founded around, right? And now getting in touch with these core assumptions really does require a real reflection on the organization, because a lot of times, the core assumptions of the organization get lost. They get lost, and the mission and the vision statement begin to drift a little bit, or begin to become inconsistent with core assumptions, right? And so and then do the artifacts and the actions of the organization match? Let me give an example here. When I became the CEO of our organization and started to relate to the board of directors and to the other elements of the organization that I wasn't a part of in my previous role as the program director. Right? I was the program director. I ran all the programs. I was involved in that. Now when I became the CEO, I was now, really in charge of fundraising and board development and, and relationship with stakeholders and community, right? That was sort of, that was a newer sort of piece. And so I started to really do this sort of comparison and saying, did the artifacts and actions of our organization really match what we believe, right? Now, let me give one example. We did a big fundraising thing. The organization did a big fundraising thing. I never went to it when I was program director, because it was really like a black tie event, and there were all these wealthy people who came, and it just wasn't like my thing, and my predecessor would handle that, right? And it was like a black tie fundraising event. When I became the CEO, and we had one of our board committees said, okay, we got to plan our black tie event, I began to question it and say, well, this black tie event, this is an event, our name is on the event. Does it really reflect who we are? Does it really reflect, are there people with disabilities there? And most, no, the answer was no, there weren't people with disabilities there. And only paraded in to sort of, I don't know, somehow, some way make the blue blood people that were there feel like it was worth their time, like pat somebody on the head. We're raising money for this, this poor disabled person. And it just didn't feel right. Right? And I, so I raised to the board, I said, you know what, I think we should abandon this black tie event, and anything we do, whether it's to raise money or raise awareness or raise friends, we should do together. We should do, because we believe all people matter. And so, this notion that some people matter more than other people was something inconsistent with, I think, the core assumption of the organization. And so it wasn't a very popular decision with my board, right? They said, we've been doing this forever, people look forward to it. Yeah. And I said, no, there's other ways we can raise money. I don't think this is consistent with who we are, right? Now, that was a hard decision to make, but I really felt that it was the right decision to make. Now, that notion that, well, do you have to sometimes hold your nose in order to, get the money you need to do what's important? I just think when you start drifting, when you start becoming inconsistent with what you believe, you really run some serious risks. Developing and sustaining any profound change process requires a fundamental shift in thinking. This is from Peter Senge. He wrote a book called The Fifth Discipline. It's an excellent book that looks at creating a learning organization. But let's get back to artifacts, right? Artifacts are things the organization does, celebrations that it has, symbols that it has, logos, the jargon that it uses, the rituals that begun to manifest in how the organization operates, right? These are called artifacts. And within the construct of artifacts, part of, I think, excellence is to really look at where is there an alignment between these things and the core assumptions of the organizations, right? Do the symbols matter, right? Um, I, I remember years ago going to a lecture that Wolfensberger did. Wolfensberger was at Syracuse University. He wrote a big book called Normalization, and that became social role valorization, which I know some of you guys know about. But one of the things that Wolfensberger did, this was years and years and years ago, that really stuck with me, is he showed a whole series of logos, of organizational logos, that little picture that you share that sort of somehow tells your story, tells your organizational story. It's just a little picture, right? Drawn. Here's a logo here, right? So let me just show you this logo, right? It's the organization that I work for, right? And we really thought about this logo. We thought about the picture we wanted to portray our organization, because what Wolfensberger discovered was a lot of pictures organizations used were devaluing, were pictures that were somehow, some way disparaging of people with disabilities. I don't have a bunch of logos to show you now, but there are some classic logos that literally, like the United Way has a logo, right? And that logo is like, it looks like a guy, like a stick figure with his hands out like this. And there's like a rainbow that connects the fingers, right, of the hand. And the head of the stick figure, you can't tell that it's a person, but the head, it looks like a person. And the head is disattached from the stem, right? And it almost looks like, these poor unfortunate people, we're really trying to get you to give us money so we can help them, right? So logos, symbols that we have communicate something. And in a way, part of our thinking has to be consistent. Do we want the symbols to consistently portray something we deeply believe in, right? The ceremonies we had, this black tie event where there wasn't one person with a disability at, was inconsistent, right? Jargon use, stories that permeate or that run through the organization, stories that people tell about the organization. These kinds of things are all artifacts that tell a story. So in a simplified way, you have core assumptions, then you have stated values, right? The core assumptions manifest in a statement. And then the artifacts, the visible activities of the organization, all these three things have to coincide, right? So with that in mind, when we think about organizations, in organizational behavior, organizational theory has a really interesting sort of history to it. And if you look at, organizational theory literature and books, there's pretty much agreement in this track record, right? That the first organizational theory swirled around 1700, right? And it was really a military model. And Frederick the Great, who was really associated with this, really spoke to this military model. Now, a military model is essentially, you have, the officers, they think and decide, they transmit the information to the sergeants or the middle level, and the mid managers then carry out the assignments by telling the front line what to do. Right? That's a classic military model. Somebody thinks it up. There's small elite group at the top of the triangle, and then a middle manager who basically carries out the orders, right? So if you think of, again, a military model, I was in the United States Army, right? So you had the officers, and then you had the, enlisted, not enlisted men, but the NGOs, the non-commissioned officers, sergeants and whatnot, carrying out the task, and then the enlisted men and women, doing what they were told. That's a classic military model. And that military model, initially sort of contrived and articulated in the 1700s, still dominates most organizational behavior. Still dominates. Think about your agency right now, right? Somebody, some leadership team decide something, and then they transmit that to middle management, and the middle management then carries out the orders by telling the DSP what to do. Right now, it's not that stark, but that sort of approach back from the 1700s is how organizations still behave, right? Now, in the 1800s, you started to get some thinking added, some enlightenment added into this mixture. So Max Weber really began to look at this notion of structure and started to delineate some structure is good, but too much structure is bad. Too much structure can actually stunt an organization, right? So Weber starts writing about this. Of course, it was controversial because in that era, the thinking was clearly officers and leaders know what to do, and frontline people just follow their order. You see that at McDonald's, you see that everywhere you go. That's the way things are. Frederick Taylor in the 1900s introduced the scientific method as another sort of feature of thinking about organizational behavior. And then in 1920, Elton Mayo did some very famous studies called the Hawthorne studies. And Mayo was an organizational theorist that was interested in, did other things affect successful outcome, right? And the Hawthorne studies really looked at, lighting, and wanted to look at lighting, and did light on an assembly line, and did better lighting make for more successful product? If the lights were brighter, would you have more productivity, right? But what Mayo began to discover was that it wasn't just the lighting. There were other dimensions, because sometimes even when the lights were dim, productivity was high. If the lights were bright, sometimes productivity was low. There was something else affecting productivity. And then enter 1950 with a very, very important paradigm shift, because Douglas McGregor was, teaching at Harvard University in the United States, began to really think more about organizational behavior, and especially on the heels of Mayo's famous Hawthorne effects. And what he postulated was that there were two theories that needed to be considered in an organization's agenda, right? Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X stated that workers were, had to be watched. Workers would gold brick if they had a chance. They would take advantage of the organization, if they had the opportunity, that you had to really be mindful of the worker, because the worker would take advantage of you. That's theory X. But what McGregor began to say was, wait a second, there's another theory here, theory Y, where the worker, if they feel valued and some ownership, they'll work hard. They'll work greater. That theory X can actually stunt worker productivity. Theory Y could enhance it if the employee was incorporated, right? Now, this was an incredible breakthrough. Now, this was only 1950, right? This notion began to be looked at. And then in 1960, on the heels of McGregor's work, Abraham Maslow did his famous hierarchy of needs, right? The Maslowian hierarchy of needs. And, Maslow there's like a pyramid, right? And he had 5 layers on the pyramid, right? And the very bottom layer was essentially survival. And then the next layer was security, next layer up. And then the third layer up was social relevance. And then the fourth layer up was the self, esteem. And then the fifth layer, the very top of the pyramid, was what he called self-actualization, right? And so Maslow really began to revolutionize organizational behavior and theory, because what he did is he took McGregor's work and he created this schema that if we could just make sure the worker had their basic security met, their basic survival met, right? That you worked in a place that was comfortable, that was warm, that was well lit. You had all these sort of basics. And then security, you knew that you would have them tomorrow, that you wouldn't lose your job, by being sick, that there were benefits available to you, right? So you have survival as the lowest one, and then benefits, right? And then teams, which was the social relevance of an organization, that you had people to relate with and relate to, right? And then esteem, that you were rewarded, that you were acknowledged as a member of that team. And then if all those things happen, you could get to the highest level, which Maslow called self-actualization, right? The highest order. Now, Maslow's work was kind of further evolved by McClellan, really looking at this whole notion of achievement and self-actualization. Peter Senge in 1980 comes up with the learning organization, incorporating, frontline people, getting them involved, help, they have as many good ideas as the people at the top. Stephen Covey really began to then further evolve organizational behavior by talking about the essential habits, the 7 habits of highly effective people. And then 2000 and beyond, we now see the relevance of culture and community in organizational behavior, that if people feel a sense of ownership, if they're a part of the dialogue, then good things can happen, right? And so you have organizations that have been typed, right? Paternalistic organizations are the ones that are, basically daddy decides, right? Leader decides, other people follow. Bureaucratic are ones that are structured. Autocratic, where you have, a single, person that really is calling the shots. Everybody else just follows suit. Authoritative, consultative, and innovative, right? These are types of organizations. So how do we go from good to great? And that Jim Collins wrote just a really, really successful business structure book called From Good to Great, right? And Collins, looked at organizations and really looked at this transformation from good to great. I would think every organization that's on our call today is a good organization, right? That just your mere success from year to year makes you a good organization. Somebody's investing in you, so you're obviously doing something. But Collins really said, how do you get to great? How can we move further down that path, right? And so this idea of key theories, understanding some of these key theories, 7 habits, organizational learning, and talk to people that you respect who have organizations that seemingly are successful. What do they do? How do they do it? Visit forward-thinking organizations. Compare notes. A frank and honest assessment. Like where are we? Not trying to convince yourself how good you are, but really an honest appraisal. And then sharing information with your key stakeholders. How can they be a part of that? Okay? Hemingway says we should never confuse movement with action, though, and action should be deliberate. Senge says what we see depends on what we are prepared to see. What we see depends on what we are prepared to see. So then, Kurt Lewin, organizational theorist, talked a lot about, if you really want to get better, if you want the behavior of your organization to be more successful, then this notion of unfreezing what you're doing now, making some deliberate changes in structure and spirit, and then refreezing that, that particular design, right? And within the framework of changing organizational behavior, there can be small little modifications that can be made. There can be strategic modifications, or there can be transformational changes, right? But we know that people are creatures of habit and they resist change, especially top-down change, where somebody in leadership says, we're going to do it this way. I'm convinced this is the best thing. They have had no investment in the decision. And so some of these things are why people resist change. So you have a great new idea, you're going to try something new, and you sit down with your team and say, okay, here, I got this great idea, and then these things come up. People don't understand, the information doesn't seem to really make sense to them. They feel like somehow, some way they're going to lose something. Politics can get in the way. It's not as convenient as, it doesn't sound as convenient as the way we've always done it. So these kinds of things then mute change. But we know that people don't resist change as much as they resist being changed. And this goes back all the way to the Hawthorne studies, that what they began to discover when people are included, especially people who are carrying out the orders, right? When they're included and involved in developing the direction, there's greater ownership. It takes more time and it's harder because the compromises unfold. But even be that as it may, there's a greater synchronicity in terms of the energy, because if you change within the framework, that's fine, but sometimes the framework has to actually be reworked, right? And so if I didn't believe it with my own mind, I never would have seen it, right? Now, this is a really interesting quote, because what this really refers to is that if you start to think something, you get a better sense of then how it might unfold. But believing it with your own mind is the first step. It's almost like uh, my wife and I were just shopping for a new car, right? We needed a new car, and so we did all this research on the cars, and we found a car that seemingly met our needs. That was in our price range. It, size wise, safety issues. I mean, all the things that we felt were important. This car met it. And then when we looked at when we did the research and brought the car up, I had never seen this car before. It was a Subaru. It was called the Crosstrek. And I had seen Subaru Outbacks, and I had seen Subaru, there are other Subarus that I've seen, but I never saw a Crosstrek. And once we started to look at the car, we went and looked at a Crosstrek, we took it for a drive. Then everywhere we went, I saw them, right? I never saw them before, but then after, I began to, ingest this, they were everywhere, right? So this notion about getting people involved in the change process really becomes like an important part of the agenda. And so this idea, what we do and how we do it, are sort of on the surface, but why are we doing it gets us closer to the values that we subscribe to, and the beliefs that we have. And when this begins to get, when you get consistency between the core assumptions, the value statement, and then the artifacts, the actions of the organization, you begin to attract the right people, right? Because there are steps to, promoting change in an organization, right? That John Carter wrote a popular book on leading change. That was the title of the book. And the notion about establishing an urgency, right? I mean, in our work, and most of the folks on this call, work in the field where we're trying to get people included and engaged in community. And we've been struggling. It's hard. We haven't been able to do it. The pandemic set us back even, right? So there's an urgency that to this. When will we do it? When can we get back to, this notion of putting this on the radar, right, is establishing a sense of urgency. Having a guiding coalition. Who are the key people that are believers in this? And do they really represent this broader notion of the organization? What is the vision and strategy? And then how can we communicate that effectively, and empower some actions, get some things under our belt, and then consolidate those gains, embed them into the culture of the organization. So there are strategies related to change, but you see this notion passion really coming more from the spiritual side of the organization rather than the structural side. Remember, going back to that notion of structure and spirit, right? And passion is a spiritual dimension. It's hard to structure passion into an organization. You can't, I don't know, let's create a passion office, or something. You can't physically manipulate it. Passion is something that's generated from the inside out. And so change really starts, and success starts with this notion of passion, right? And so here's what I'd like to do, if we can. It's the concepts that we talked about, there's lots of them. I don't want to get too pedagogical here with you. What I like to do is really start to examine this in a intentional kind of a way, right? And so what we're going to do is, I think we have the capacity, Tanya, we have the capacity to break into work groups, right? So we have, I think, about 47 people that are part of the meeting today, right? And so what I'd like to do is, if we could create, I don't know, maybe we create 4 or 5 random groups. And we're going to send people into the group. But here, before we do that, here's what I'm going to ask you to do in this little exercise, right? One is, I mean, there are 3 questions that you see on this slide, right? And I would like you to jot this down right now before you get into your random group, right? Because what we're going to ask you to do is to identify first the physical things that really in an organization would make for a quality environment. What do you think are the physical sort of things? Offices, desks, physical things that could actually, having your own office. I mean, I'd just like you to just sort of think about this in an open-ended kind of a way, right? It's just a little exercise, right? So I want you to identify the physical things, make a little list of the things that you think would make your work site a better place. Parking, if it was easier for me to park, it was kind of close to the door, if I had my own office, if, we had, the kinds of physical things that would allow us, the equipment maybe that we needed to do a better job, right? So the first issue is to think about the physical things. In fact, let's do this. Let's create 3 work groups. Just 3 random work groups. That'd probably be 12, 15 people in each of the groups, right? And so group 1 is going to have the physical question. And just to talk about it, think about it, frame it. Group 2 is going to have the intellectual things, right? And what do we mean by intellectual things is computers, theories, training, the kinds of thought-provoking things that will make for a higher quality environment. If we had these things, they would make for. So group 2 is going to have the intellectual things. And then group 3, I want you to think about the spiritual things that make for a higher quality environment. What are the things that happen between people, amongst people, that are more relationship oriented, that would make for a higher quality workplace, right? So group 1 is going to have the physical things. Group 2 is going to have the intellectual things. Group 3 is going to have the spiritual things, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to put you into these random groups, and I'm going to ask for, one person to step forward to play kind of a facilitator role to get people to talk about the things that you had maybe on your list. We're going to spend about 5 minutes privately thinking about the items that you've identified. Then you're going to discuss them, and then you're going to frame them into a into a list, basically a list or recommendations, if you will. Group one is going to have physical recommendations. Group two is going to have intellectual recommendations. Group three is going to have spiritual recommendations. Okay. So let's do that. If somebody can just take, I know that we're just kind of doing this very in a very spontaneous kind of a way, but you'll be in either group one, group two, or group three. Tanya is going to manipulate them so that we have. I'm going to give about. We're going to give about.
Do it right now because Nicole's the creator, and we're trying to make the 3 random groups. So
Okay.
Myself and Corey don't have access to be able to do that.
Who doesn't?
Corey and myself don't have access to do it.
Okay, Nicole's going to do it.
Oh,
okay.
You're gonna have to make Nicole the host again. So if you just give us like a couple of minutes just to kind of get that figured out.
Okay. Well, while they're figuring that out, just one of the things that I'd like each of the groups to do is I would like you to not only list the items that you think would enhance quality, right? But then I would like you in the conversation, once you get your list, to spend a couple minutes monetizing that list. That is, what would the investment be in these things? What would it cost, if you will, if you were to do some of this, some of these things that you're thinking about? What would the cost be? How much would have to be invested in order to, like, for example, say the group one said, if we had parking that was easily accessible right to our office, that would be great. Well, in order to get parking, you might need to buy a tract of land right near the setting in order to have that, right? So what might the investment be in the recommendations to enhance physical quality in the workspace? Okay. So now, can I set the groups, Tanya?
I'm just on the phone with Nicole trying to figure it out.
Okay, because I might be able to, since I'm the co-host, I might be able to do that. Let me see here. Let me see. Remote control. No. Okay. When I go to more, let's see. I don't have optimized clip. I'm just looking at the control that I have. And I don't have control to do that either. Unless there's something that I'm missing here.
We've got IT on call too, trying to figure it out.
Okay. Okay. So while we're waiting to see if we can get into our groups, we could conceivably do this exercise in the chat room as well, without breaking into the work groups. So it's conceivable we could do that without basically putting people into the work group, and just do it in 3 phases. Okay. So why don't we try that? Because if we just can't get into the work groups, no big deal. Let's, all of us that are on the call, 45 of us, let's use the chat room, and let's do question 1. What items do you think would make for a more successful qualitative workplace, right? This would be physical space or physical equipment or physical sort of appointments to workspace that would make for a higher quality, right? So in the chat room, if you could just think about the kinds of things that would enhance quality, right, in your work. This might be where you sit and where you work and the physical things that you have, right? So here, I'm getting some people coming on, plants, computers, lunch, a lunch station, some new technology, great. Standing desks, nice. Soft music, nice. Comfortable furniture, natural light, dog-friendly environment, nice. What else? Any other? Okay, so we got office with windows, good air quality, nice. Meeting rooms that are more comfortable. Maintain cleanliness, like maintenance, good. Refreshments, nice. Regulated temperature. Okay. Vehicles, so vans. Coffee station. Okay, see if there's, let's spend a minute or two more. Heated garage, nice. We're dreaming, but that's okay. Being able to work remote. Right, so exercise area, nice. Okay. Okay, good. Let's, any more that we can get done. Got a lot. I'm kind of keeping track of these. Okay, temperature, staff lounge, quiet space, wellness rooms. Okay, quiet area. Great, good, good, good. Got a good list here. Okay. Okay. So let's hold on that and we'll come back to it. Let's go to question 2, right? So question 2 was more within the structure of what intellectual things would make for a higher quality. These would be things that would really help develop ideas, things that might make for a smarter place, a place. So we got think tank, membership to online research, job specs, room for growth, good computers and tech, trainings, self-directed opportunities, smart boards, resource areas, websites or email ideas, ability to have chats and brainstorming, training. Great. Anything else? Mentors, ability to have chats for brainstorming, resources to do your job, Mentors. Okay. Great, great. Work group retreats. Nice ideas. Nice ideas here. This enhances the quality, the intellectual quality of an organization. People that challenge the status quos. Outside memberships. Okay, good. Great communication, listening. Okay. Methods for internal communication between various programs. Great. Where there's more fluidity. Good. Where people can kind of think together even when they're in different divisions. Work-life balance. Okay. Good. Goal setting. Check in with the manager. Organic conversations. Nice. Paid time for physical wellness. Okay, so yeah, no worries that we don't have to get in the groups. That's okay. We're getting a lot of really good stuff in this broader way of organizing this. So okay, that's great. Open conversations and understanding about mental health. Okay, great. Okay, so let's do this now. So we've got a good list here as well. Let's go to our third question. Right? I'd like to have you think about what would make for a better spiritual environment with a little s, a better culture. What would enhance the quality between and amongst people? Honesty and trust. Okay, what else? We're talking about now the spiritual side. How do we enhance the quality of our spirit, of our souls? Education, don't judge. Transparency. Work on listening skills. Team building. Treat people like family. Opening rituals. Stop looking for the slight in comments. Being happy and kind. Focus on gifts. Everybody treated fairly. Simple good mornings and how are you? Invitation to express thoughts. Acceptance of difference. Simple affirmations. Have a great welcoming from someone who's friendly at the front door. Okay. Good ideas, really good ideas. Okay, so just to wrap this up before we open up for conversation, right, and questions about this. The last task, and we won't necessarily do this with the full group, but I'd like us all to think about it, right? So the first element to quality were the physical things. And there were some great ideas here, right? People saying, well, if we had better air quality, the temperature was better, we had vehicles, furniture that was more comfortable, heated garage, and a little bit, even though we're dreaming, if you took all those ideas that everybody had kicked around in the chat room, just on the physical, and if we monetized it, right? That is, we said, how much would it cost? Now, obviously, that's a hard question to answer because each person's sort of sense of this and where they're working may be different. But the point that I'm going for here is that any of those physical changes are costly, right? They're pretty expensive and they require an investment, a capitalized investment, right? And not that it's not worth it. Some of those things are worth the investment, but it is costly. Right? The second listing, which was essentially the intellectual things, are also costly. Some people said smart boards and trainings that we might have, and having resources, online resources, and the opportunity to kind of gather together. That's also costly, to bring in training, to have people go to training. That's an investment, right? Not that it's not worth it, but it's a pretty hefty investment. The physical, I mean, if we actually monetize these things, I think we would discover that the physical things are probably the costliest. The intellectual things are also costly, but maybe a little less. But let's look at that third group. What we could do to enhance the spiritual side of the organization. And people said honesty, transparency, trust, simple hello, asking people how they feel, looking at people's gifts, no judging, right? Now, when you take those things and if you try to monetize them, there's hardly a cost for most of that. It requires some action, no question, and it requires some energy, no question about that. But from a sense of cost, the investment is really, really low. I mean, from a cost benefit analysis, anyone who would look at these three dimensions and say, what would I get my biggest bang for the buck would be on investing in the spiritual side of the organization, right? Investing in the notion of people just opening themselves up to other people. And so all three of these things are important to a successful organization, no question about it. The physical elements of the organization, the intellectual elements of the organization, the spiritual elements. But from an investment standpoint, investing in our person-to-person connection is probably the biggest bang for the buck that we could get in enhancing organizations and organizational behavior. And so this little exercise sort of does that. It allows people to dream a bit about what would be nice, but in terms of realizing dreams, the easiest dimension to realize dreams in is within the context of the spiritual domain of the organization, in the people side of the equation, right? So with that little exercise in mind, let's open this up. We're going to go to the sort of the matrix, and let's open this up. If you have a question or a comment on anything we talked about, either content or the little exercises that we did, the Baldrige exercise we did in the front end, this little exercise in thinking about these domains of quality in our organizations today. And let's see if we can have a kind of a discussion. I know that we have Corey monitoring the chat room now for questions. So let's let's see if we can get those questions responded to. And let's see, let me stop sharing too. Is my slide still up?
No,
No. Okay, great. So good. So Corey, what are we getting any questions in the chat room from folks or comments?
Yep. So what are some strategies to enhance an organization's culture?
Yeah. Well, it's I think that would be a great question just to toss out and have people answer on their own. What I would weigh in on that is investing in people developing relationships. And I think when you invest in and when I say invest in relationships, I mean creating opportunities for people to build relationships with one another, trying to build in some time and opportunity for people to get to know one another better, get to have a better sense of who some of their coworkers are over and above, the presentation that we bring when we come to work. And when we do those kinds of things and people get to know one another, I think culture enhances. They begin to feel better about each other. And as they feel better about each other, they start watching out for each other, supporting one another, protecting one another. All those dimensions of trust, honesty, those pro-social behaviors we've talked about before, they go up when people get a chance to know each other a little bit better. And, I know with the community living Algoma staff that are on the call, we did a staff meeting where we talked about the best part of me, right? And we posed some questions asking people to think about, who do they admire most, at their agency or on their team. And people had a chance to answer those questions. And even just something like that affirmation causes people to feel better about each other. And when we feel better about it, we don't have to always agree. We're not talking about total agreement. We're just talking about people really respecting each other. And in that respect, tolerating each other and finding the best parts of each other really enhances, I think, the culture. Corey, anything else?
Brian's asking if the first 2 training sessions that we recorded are available to look back at, and they were recorded. So we will get the links to those and send those out if you haven't received it. Nicole's chimed in, Brian, the first 2 trainings will be available on YouTube shortly. They're just getting edited. Thank you, Nicole. And Serge is asking, what are your thoughts around organizations investing in spiritual things primarily and on an ongoing basis, but also making a commitment annually to enhancing both physical and intellectual things that require more of a monetary commitment to enhance the overall quality in the workplace?
Yeah. Good reflections from Serge. Thank you. I'm a firm believer in the strengthening of the spiritual side of an organization. I've always, over the years, as I've tried to think through and then had the responsibility of leading an organization, I always felt my most important job was to make people feel welcomed, all people that are a part of the organization, those who come in regularly that we take for granted sometimes, and then those that come in as guests on occasion. I think if we could create a real sense of hospitality within an organization for and with each other, that alone would have just incredible dividends, I believe. And as I tried to illustrate in the workshop or in the little group activity we did, that the biggest bang for our buck is investing in people connecting with one another, finding ways and means to do that. And I think that the dividends you reap are amazing. A lot of places will invest in the physicality of an organization, in an office and desks and comfortable furniture and all those things. They're important, but they're costly, right? They're expensive. And many organizations just don't have the discretionary dollars to do that. You get a group like Google, and they could come into a space and really kind of totally, work it so that it's really baits the spirituality of the group. And I would, I would look at the physicality and say, how can we physically make people connecting with one another happen more easily in our physical space? We had the opportunity at my organization at class where we moved our agency headquarters, if you will, from one location. We sold that building. We bought a new building with the proceeds of the sale. And we did a capital campaign to physically develop it. And we spent a lot of time in focus groups with the folks we serve and with our staff who come in regularly. How would you want this space to be, this new space? And we had the ability to do it. We were moving anyway, so we just and folks they wanted open space. They wanted a cafe. They wanted a lot of things that we saw on the list that just came on, and we were able to do that, and because we were investing in new space anyway. But what we rather than just have our architect develop nice drawings, we really wanted to listen to the people we supported that happened to come into the building, listen to the families, and listen to the people that worked for the organization, and then develop something around what they wanted. So I think the more we do that, the more people really recognize that they're valued. And when people recognize that they're valued, they work harder, they care more, they invest more. And it's not trying to dupe people, it's really trying to just create the energy that's going to be the most positive for everybody. Other questions?
So there's a couple more. What kind of changes did you experience when you worked on spirituality within your organization when you became a CEO?
Yeah.
And do you want to?
Yeah, let me take that first. I was fortunate when I became the CEO because my predecessor was really person-centered, and we were going. I mean, it wasn't like I had to make major changes because he already had set the table for a lot of this, and he was also very inclusive in his management style. So we already had a start on that. The bigger challenge was with my board, because the board members really didn't feel. I mean, they knew they had an obligation, they knew they had a responsibility, but I think they really felt adjunct to like they came to their meeting. Their meetings were in the night. Nothing was going on at the center at that time. It was, they kind of came in, did listen to what was going on and left. So a lot of what I wanted to do was really try to get the board and really look at the spiritual connectedness between board members, and to try to make them feel more like family than like this sort of, like they came in and made decisions and left. And that was a work in progress. That was always something that I was the CEO for about 28 years before I retired. So I was always trying to nurture that and work on that. And there were strategic things we actually did. Like, for example, we would start every meeting with a question posed. Something had nothing to do with our agency or with our work, but just was posed to have people react to the question that showed some of their own humanity. Like, I mean, and the questions were things like, what's the best book you read this past year, right? Or, if you could play a musical instrument, what would it be? Right? And questions like that, they had nothing to do with the nature of our work. But when people would answer the question, that really kind of connected some dots between and amongst people, because they started to see another side of their colleagues. The board members started to see another side of their colleagues. And people didn't wear their masks. They started to take their masks off. And when their masks came off, people, began to find other portals for connection between and amongst each other. So that was, I think, the bigger challenge. Now, anytime, the economics of running an organization, as you well know, they go up and down. There's times when there's better economics. There's times when the economics are tougher, belt tightening times. And so, that the knee-jerk reaction sometimes when economic times are tighter is to pull back, right? And I understand that, and I could see why. And so we would make 2 or 3 steps forward, and then there would be a couple steps back. But I think as long as you kind of have your eyes on the prize, that you're really looking at nurturing all parts of the organization, that's, you just stay consistent. Sometimes you move a little faster, other times you move a little slower, but you're moving toward something. You're moving toward an objective that everyone sort of understands. So I think that that first element, that enhancing spirituality, the bigger challenge was with the board, and that started to, that also started to humanize for us. And the way the board did their business, they started to change that, incorporating more people we served, incorporating other staff members, DSPs and frontline folks. So it's still a work in progress. It's not perfect. And I don't know if there is such a thing as a perfect organization, but I think as long as we continue to work toward that, we see that happen.
Thanks, Al. Next comment or question, sorry. How would you suggest that an organization improve communication to inform their employees and customers of change and or being part of change? I think we should always be evolving, but at times it's the way it's presented or done that it doesn't go over well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I really agree with that. And I think that lots of times it's not done very well. I think that oftentimes the pressure of time makes an organization, do some unilateral things that aren't inclusive. You can't include everybody in every decision. I mean, there's an inefficiency there as well. And so I think the finding those opportunities for inclusivity in communication, and pulling those levers when you can, is the best investment in that. You can't do it all the time. And, running an organization where you don't make one move until everybody agrees on it is crazy, right? I mean, you just can't do that. And so there has to be, there has to be sometimes some of those decisions that maybe people don't agree with or don't like. And as long as you try to be as transparent in why you're doing what you're doing, and you get people to understand that, that I think even they might not agree with it, but they respect it. They respect that you did it. And if you can include them, they know that you really are sincere about that. So it gets back to trust, right? That notion that people feel they can trust their leaders, and that when a decision is made, they know that even if they don't agree with it, they feel like the leader tried to incorporate as many dimensions into the decision as they could with the time that they had in sorting out or figuring out or deciding on something. So it gets back to trust. Anything else in the chat room?
There's nothing at this time, Al. If anybody else has anything they wanted to add to the chat, or if you wanted to throw your hand up, we can ask Al yourself.
Yeah. And while we're doing that, these dimensions, I want to make sure that everyone appreciates, and I think you do, that this is complex stuff. And I simplify it to try to describe it, but these are things that they're moving parts, and you're dealing with human beings and other kinds of things happening in their lives that maybe you don't know about, that affect sometimes the outcomes. But organizational behavior is definitely something that you can impact and you can influence in many ways. And again, if you just kind of think about the structure, how the organization is organized, who reports to whom, how, what divisions or departments do you have? And then the spiritual side. Do people know one another? Do they care about one another? Do they feel valued? Do they feel that they're honestly you're welcomed in the organization? And kind of constantly trying to impact those two pieces of the puzzle, right? Is challenging, and then you throw in wild cards that you never anticipated or expected. Something happens that you have no control over. They make it even more complex. But I think one of the last points I'd like to make is that sometimes when we structure something, and Kurt Lewin talked about this in the slide I showed, and we freeze it, right? The structure freezes. This is the way we do it. This is the structure. It's hard to unfreeze that sometimes and to say, well, if it's not as effective anymore, then why are we doing it? Why don't we do it in another way, right? and that's scary to people. People resist that. They're used to, people are sometimes used to doing things the same way, even though it doesn't produce results, right? And that's like Einstein quote about insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, even though you don't get the results you want. So unfreezing is challenging, but we're moving in new times, right? That, the agenda is community engagement and community inclusion, and so, we've taken care of people for a lot of years, and now how do we move into an engagement framework, right? Where it's not so much about taking care of people as it is empowering them, and creating the passages for community. What kind of organization is best structured to do that? So with that being said, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought you were done. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. Go ahead.
So we do have a comment, a question, and then Sandy has her hand up. So the
Great.
comment being meeting people where they are at and helping them understand or not understand, but still give significance of their worth.
Yeah.
And then question.
Amen.
Yes. Our staff are very exhausted at this time, both mentally and physically at work and at home. As we come out of COVID-19, and this makes it harder to move forward with change, any ideas how to bring them to be part of the positive change?
Yeah. I think inviting people into the process is a step we need to take. Now, sometimes that's a hard step to take, because inviting somebody means that you're going to listen to, may not do what they recommend, but you want to listen to them. You want to consider it, right? You want them to feel that they were listened to and that they were considered. And that takes time. And sometimes we're under the gun. And so I think being able to balance that, when can we include more people into the process, and when do we have to make a call without as much input as we would like to have, and let people know that, right? We're based on time, we're making this call. We know that it might not be the most popular with some people, but here's why we did it. And hopefully you can see that. Maybe you don't necessarily agree with it, but you can understand why, and know that anytime we have a chance to include and welcome input, we're going to do that if we have the time to do it, right? So again, just that honest assertion with people, I think it pays dividends. Sandy, you had a question?
Just more of a comment. Certainly after being in this field for 40 plus years, my comment would be that you don't have to wait for the CEO or the ED or that person at the top to implement or to tell you what to do or to say this is how it's going to be done. There are leaders throughout every single organization, champions for change, understanding the nuances of this, looking at the domains of quality, and they can make the changes themselves within their own circle, within their own elements, within their own departments. And that has ripple effect, right? So don't just wait for it to come top down, would be my comment.
Well, Sandy, that's not only a good comment, that's really a good life recommendation, not just in your job, but in life, to participate, to don't wait, don't feel like you have to wait for an invitation. And I'm not talking about being so assertive that you impose, but recognize that there are that the organization, certainly Community Living Algoma, I think I could say the same thing of the organization that I works for, welcome people's input, right? And that it's not, when people get educated, oftentimes education is structured in a way that that the person waits, for an invitation, and that they don't step forward, that we're just kind of more passive in our behavior. And that happened, that just is part of the conditioning process that occurs where we, we say, well, they really don't care what I have to say, or I'll just wait for them. I don't want somebody to get mad at me, or I don't want to do it the wrong way, so I'm going to wait to be told. That kind of thing, that gets back to that military model mentality we talked about, where somebody else has figured it out, and they've not only figured it out, but they've actually codified what you do, and you follow some kind of a, some kind of a book. It's a military model that you're not supposed to think for yourself, or to think about a better way. You're almost punished if you do that. So the way people get conditioned oftentimes is to be passive and just let somebody else figure it out. Just tell me what I have to do and I'll do it. And I know that the organization's reality in Community Living Algoma, certainly, and I think most of the other organizations that are on this call, are really want to see people take initiative and give it a try. If it doesn't work, okay, we'll go back and figure it out. We'll figure out another way. But that welcoming people and participating, I think, is a part of the cultural norm that we want to continue to nurture. And some people will do it. Other people will still wait. They're just so conditioned. They don't get their hand slapped or get yelled at. And so they choose not to do anything at all until they're told what to do. And you get some of that. But I think, Sandy, your point is really well taken, that give it a shot, step forward. If you see a better way, offer it, recommend it. Nobody's going to chew your head off or bite at you because you're putting out an idea of what might make more sense or be better. So thank you. Thanks, Sandy, for that point. Great. And I think we're almost at noon. Tanya, is there any final parting comments? I know we have one more session coming up in May that we have. And so why don't we just kind of close out, summarize, and remind people of that session?
Yes, so thank you, Al, for another wonderful session. We have recorded it, so once it's ready, we'll make sure we send that out. If you didn't get the PowerPoint and the handouts from today, we can make sure that you get a copy of that as well. And our next session is Tuesday, September the 20th, and it's on ethics and social capital. And then we have two more after that. We have the organizing for social change on Tuesday, October 18th. And then we have macro ideas for change, which is Tuesday, November 15th, all 10 a.m. Eastern time. So we'll make sure that we send out those links and information to you ahead of time.
Okay, great.
So in closing, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. We really appreciate everyone plugging into the call. We really appreciate your presentation, Al, so thank you. And thank you, Corey, for moderating the chat and everything.
Thank you, folks. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day and look forward to seeing you soon.
Al, you're going to stay on the call?
I am.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.